We are live. It's pretty much how every show starts now. We're live. And I always give people just a second as they get on because not everybody is punctual at 6:00. So, but so glad we could do this tonight. It's been a crazy small business Saturday, as everything else in 2020 is all unusual and not like we're used to. But we're so glad we were able to do this event tonight and bring a couple authors to our online audience at One More Page Books. I'm in my basement in Arlington, not at the store. But we did have a few people in the store working today and doing some more curbside pickups. We're doing that 7 days a week right now through the holidays. So everybody keeps ordering online, which is making us very happy. But I wanted to welcome everybody tonight online and do a quick introduction of both of our authors, and then I'm going to scoot out of here and let everybody enjoy the conversation. One quick reminder, if you're watching on Facebook, feel free to leave a comment or a question in the comments there, and we'll be able to see those. And if you're watching on YouTube, you should use the chat function on YouTube. It's how they do the live chat there. So I want to welcome Greer Macallister. She's a longtime friend of the bookstore. And we were so glad to have you in the store. The last book that came out, Woman 99. And so, sorry, we have to do it this way this time, but hopefully in a few more months, maybe we'll be able to have you back, talk about this one or the next one. So Greer is a poet, a short story writer, a playwright, and a novelist. We've had her many times, most recently, like I said, for Woman 99. And even though we can't be together, we were so thrilled that you reached out to us to do this event related or kind of tied in with Small Business Saturday. It was good timing for your new book, The Arctic Fury, which comes out on Tuesday. So awesome timing. And then we're also so glad that Denny Bryce is able to join us tonight for a great conversation about historical fiction. Denny is an award-winning author whose first novel comes out in March, and that is Wild Women and the Blues. We're looking forward to that. And in addition to writing for NPR Books, she's also been interviewing authors for A Mighty Blaze, which is awesome. We love that. And is a public relations and an events professional in her other part of her life. But
not so much now, but yeah.
When events come back.
Yes.
So I want to turn it over to you guys. I'm super excited to listen to the conversation, and I hope everybody online is as well. We'll probably do questions more towards the end, but feel free to pop those in as they come into your mind. All right. Turn it over to you guys.
Thank you. Bye. Hi, everybody. This is fun. I'm so thrilled. I want to thank One More Page Books and Greer for inviting me to be the hostess for this hour of conversation about her fabulous new book. Yes, there it is, coming out on Tuesday, December 1st. Day before my next birthday. And so I want to just dive in and Greer, this is your fourth book, your fourth historical fiction. And I tell us about it. Tell us about The Arctic Fury.
Sure. And I also want to say thanks to One More Page, and I also want to say thank you for accepting my invitation, Denny, to come talk to me about this. I'm so excited for Wild Women in the Blues. Haven't gotten my hands on it yet, but looking forward to it. And this is The Arctic Fury. So yeah, we thought Small Business Saturday would be a great way to celebrate the day and celebrate bookstores. And also, since the book is almost out, it's not quite out, but I do know some people who have pre-ordered and gotten their hands on it already. So that's good news. But yeah, so The Arctic Fury is a historical novel. It's set in the 1850s, and it's about what happens when 12 women join a secret expedition to the Arctic, and then what happens when not all of them come back. So it's primarily, I think of it as historical adventure, sort of an action adventure novel. My publisher calls it a historical thriller. Some people just say historical novel. Call it whatever you want. If you read it and buy it, you're going to make me happy. You know, that's a good thing. But yeah, it is loosely based on a true story. I like to sort of use the past for most of my books as a jumping off point. So I did write Girl in Disguise, which is behind me here, is my most biographical historical fiction because it's about Kate Warren, who was a real person, and the first female Pinkerton detective. But the Arctic Fury uses the story of the lost Franklin expedition, and in particular, Lady Jane Franklin, who spent a lot of time and money sending people to look for her husband's lost Arctic expedition. They lost over 100 men and 2 ships in the 1840s. And I won't tell you what happens in my book, but in real life, they did not locate those ships until 2014 and 2016. So those ships were hidden pretty well in the Arctic. So, yeah, so Lady Jane, would use some of her own money and ask other people for money, and they sent ship after ship looking for wherever John Franklin and his men had gone. And I thought it wasn't too far-fetched, considering that Lady Jane Franklin was also very bold and ahead of her time and did a lot of adventuring of her own. She rode up the Nile and went to Malta by herself and did some crazy things for a woman of the 1840s in Tasmania. So I thought it was on the edge of plausibility that she would have sent a group of women, since none of the men had been able to find her husband. Why not send a bunch of women? So on the edge of plausibility is like where I like to set my novels, and that's where this one sits quite comfortably.
And also, you said that thriller, adventure, and a mystery.
Yeah.
And it's a very one of the things that I think I mentioned in our pre-conversation that I really was drawn in was by the characters. It's a multiple POV tale that does some things with time, but I really found there was such a distinction in the way you wrote about each character. How conscious of you when you have that multiple cast of distinguishing them as you go through your editing or revision process, or just creating the different personalities?
Yeah, it really drove the whole book. Everything about it sort of came from that decision. Because when I pitched it to my editor, I said, it's the story. It's these 2 time frames basically of following the women on the expedition, and then the murder trial a year later, when not all of them have returned, and one of them is on the trial for is on trial for the death of one of the others. And I said, and I really want to give one chapter from the perspective of every one of the women. So it's 13 women. So Virginia counts as 1, but then 12 other women also get to sort of say their piece. And I still kind of can't believe they let me get away with that, but they did. And my editor said, if you're going to do that, just make sure that what you're doing is you're showing us with each of those chapters, show us something we wouldn't know if we were only seeing it from Virginia's point of view. Because I had played around with the idea in my previous book, Woman 99, which takes place in an insane asylum, and is also a little bit of an ensemble cast. I call it my 19th century Orange is the New Black, because it's all about all these different women on the, getting thrown together who would never give each other the time of day otherwise. So, I played around with the idea of making that multiple narrators, and I decided it would be better just stick with Charlotte the whole way through. So that's first person single narrator the whole way through. It does mess around with time frames a little bit, which I told myself after The Magician's Lie I was not going to do again, and lo and behold, I keep doing it. So,
don't we always do that? Tell ourselves what we're not going to do, and then just go for it because the story says this is what has to happen.
We do what the story tells us to. So this one needed everybody to say their piece. And the way that I tried to make it easier on the reader, besides having a little cheat sheet, I think this is an ARC, so I don't think I have it. But in the final version, in the front of the book, there's a little cheat sheet with the names of everyone who goes on the expedition. So if you do have trouble keeping them straight, you can always check that.
I think that's
you've got the ARC, I think, so you may not.
I have the ARC, but I also have the electronic ARC.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so the electronic ARC,
it's in.
So you have the names and the roles, and you can check back. But for the reader's sake, I made it all third person. So you're seeing through the eyes of Virginia, but it's being described to you as Virginia does this, Virginia does that, as opposed to if it were in one chapter, it's Virginia speaking in first person, I'm going on a trip, and then second chapter is Caprice in first person, I didn't come back. I feel like that's a little harder for readers to keep track of.
Yeah.
So so it's all sort of what I considered like over the shoulder, close third camera over the shoulder. So it's not omniscient, but you're getting inside the head of Christabel, inside the head of Irene, inside the head of Elizabeth, and all of these different characters. So you are getting a little bit of their background, a little bit of how they view the world in a way that's different from how any of the
I
others.
also found that you sustained the tension by keeping, I believe, the courtroom drama chapters always take place in Virginia's POV.
Yep.
And also present tense, I believe.
So,
yeah, I believe. So there's an urgency to those connecting chapters that also sustain the tension, because you're like, well, what's going to happen at the court? How is she going to get out of this one?
Right.
And that's part of the joy of the read, frankly, is what happens next, and that's what they always tell us we're supposed to do.
Crank up that tension and just keep it cranked up the whole time. What could be easier, right?
Yeah. We talked also a little bit earlier about research. This is, as I said, we did a pre-conversation. So, but I think that I'm always intrigued by research because it's what you have to do with historical fiction to make sure as much as you can to get the authenticity of the time period. Maybe not to every detail, but that atmosphere and that environment is critical for the reader to have that feeling that they are being transported and really infused with what life or the slice of life that the story is covering. So what about your research process? How did that go for this one?
For this one, it was much bigger mess than it's been in a long time. But I sort of stumbled into historical fiction in the beginning because I wanted to write The Magician's Lie, which is about a female magician who cuts men in half on stage, because I had never heard of any woman doing such a thing. I'd heard, and seen many things about male magicians cutting women in half, because I think that's something that just is a thing.
Yeah.
And so when I got the idea for The Amazing Arden, I sort of researched. First step, right? Got to start with it. Were there any female magicians who cut men in half on stage as part of an act? And apparently the first woman who really became known for that and made that her signature illusion on stage was in the 1980s. So I had the choice to write a book about the 1980s, which, I did. I was in the 1980s once already. I felt like that was enough.
Return.
Or I could write a contemporary book, which then magicians are Vegas and on the Ellen Show, and it's a very specific sort of sub culture.
Yeah.
I wanted to write about a magician who could make front page headlines by being shocking, and that is a past thing. That is a distant past thing. So I found a really interesting story about a female illusionist who did the bullet catch, which is like the most ridiculously dangerous illusion that you can do, because they fire a gun at your face and you pretend to catch the bullet, and sometimes it works better than others. So that idea that there was a woman doing that on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City in 1897. I'm like, okay, the book's set in the 1890s period. And so then I had to learn how to write historical fiction. I had to figure out how to research and figure out how to infuse the scenes with detail the way that you're talking about, so that it's not just this big information dump of this is everything that every single person is wearing and what's on the walls and the streets that they took to get there, like the every single detail, but you want just enough detail to sweep the reader away. Exactly like you're saying, we have the same outlook on this. So The Magician's Lie took me 5 years to write because I kept stopping writing, never stopped writing. Uh, but, but I would write and then I would need a detail and I would go find the detail. And then like 3 hours later, I would know everything there was to know about hats in 1897, but I wouldn't have any words on the page other than like hat. So, uh,
Well,
so go ahead.
I find that one of the things I did with research for, I'm going to show my little book. Where is it? Where did I put it? I don't know. It's here someplace in front of me.
We got time.
Wild Women in the Blues. Yay! Coming out in March 30th of 2021, my debut novel, historical fiction, but it also has a dual timeline. So there's there's a story about a grieving young film student in 2015 and juxtaposed to the story of an ambitious chorus girl in 1925. Both stories take place in Chicago, Bronzeville neighborhood, the Bronzeville neighborhood. One of the things that inspired me to my historical fiction life, I think, has always been just waiting right here for me to just realize that's what I was supposed to be writing. In the 80s, since you brought them up.
Can't escape them.
Yeah. I was in New York City at the time, a very young, happy-go-lucky, struggling dancer, professional dancer, which meant I waited on tables a lot. And one of the places I worked was a place called the Cookery. And the Cookery's headliner on weekends was a blues singer by the name of Alberta Hunter, who was in her 80s. And she had been a big deal in the 20s. Wrote songs with Bessie Smith, traveled the country doing all sorts of things. Well, I knew her when she was in her 80s. My job at the Cookery was to bring her tea. And so we would chat before the show because we were both connected to Chicago. I lived in Chicago a lot. She was in Chicago a lot in her youth. So I was like, So that was my first introduction. The second was me digging into my own family and learning that my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, had come to the country, to this country from Jamaica in 1923 and headed directly to New York City. But she didn't spend a lot of time there because the man she came to meet was elsewhere. So she had to go find him in Ohio. But research and inspiration for these stories, the more you dig, though, at least especially when telling stories where your main characters are what I feel are hidden stories, or not just feel, is a fact that, when you're for 20th century African American main characters in the history that is being more and more is happening out of publishing, and I want it to keep happening more and more. I find that I keep finding more stories that I want to tell, which is why I spend so much time in the research realm, because sometimes it's research, but it's also discovery, realizing how much I thought I knew, and then finding there's so much more to learn and share for readers to learn as well. So there's a lot happening in the world of writing and historical fiction. What do you feel that is happening that you're excited about in the genre these days in historical?
I think definitely there's a move toward something besides World War II, although we've been saying that for probably about 3 years now, is that people might eventually get tired of World War II. People are not getting tired of World War II, but they are at least also opening up to other things. I just read a book set in first century Britannia. So it's the Romans are invading, and it's pagan, and it's bog people, and it's just very different from what I sort of have trained myself to think of as historical fiction. But it is historical fiction because it's set in the past, because that's kind of all it needs to be. To be historical fiction. So it's a bigger tent. So we're looking at different time periods. I think definitely stories that have not been told in publishing by people of different backgrounds and different everything, is a really interesting and positive thing. I just finished. Well, Rita Wood's Remembrance is amazing.
Yeah.
And so she's doing multiple timeline stuff as well with a little bit of magical.
I'm turning because I know it's behind me someplace.
It's back there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
I think you were the one who told me about Remembrance first, because you told me about it
yes,
for women for Read 99 Women.
Review it for NPR.
Yeah.
And it's been a while, frankly. And I was like, this book, it's such yay. Of course, it was right on top.
There it is.
There it is. Remember, this is a fabulous novel. And it just, what can I say about the intricacy of the story she is telling?
Yeah.
Is very remarkable, and I enjoyed it tremendously. And I'm also right now I'm reading Homegoing by can't pronounce her name. I'm sorry. It's
Jossie. I heard it pronounced, and I was surprised by it, and I still can't. So
yeah, I'm not even.
Everyone should go and find the book Homegoing and
beautifully. Right, there are just so many. I mean, you really can't. There's some. I'm looking forward to 2021 because, especially from Black authors, who are writing historical fiction, there are some that there are a lot, but at the same time, there are also friends and people I know, like Vanessa Riley's. Her book is coming out in 2021, Island Queen, and we have Kaya Alderson. Her book is coming out, I think, in late August, and it's a World War II story highlighting, focusing in on a battalion. I don't know the accurate terminology.
The WAC pilots, I think, right? Women, are they pilots or are they?
I think I don't believe they're pilots, but I could be wrong. But I know it's called Sisters in Arms. I don't know. It's Soldier Girls was one title that I remember, but it's coming out in August. It's Piper Hughley has a book that she has a contemporary coming out this year, but next year her historical will be out. I mean, there's just a laundry. There are more of these stories coming out, and I'm excited. I'm very.
Is Piper doing? I think Piper's doing the one about the woman who designed, the African American woman who designed Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress.
Yes.
I'm dying to read that story. Dying to read.
So there are just stories that are coming out, and then there's some of my other favorites that I will, Chanel Cleaton's, her book that I also reviewed, The Last Train to Key West, very much, I'll call it a paced mystery that has a lot of, I was very excited reading that book. I had a really enjoyable time. I was also, I think I mentioned to you that I looked around and I found an article that talked about why are we living in a golden age of historical fiction. It was written in 2019 and appeared in the New York Times style section. But one of the points that the article makes is making sense of our lives and of the unfathomable world in which we find ourselves has necessitated an understanding of what has come before. I found that very observant and right spot on, because so often during times that are considered, things are just going the way they're going, like they've been in the last few months, that sometimes dystopia books become the let's look ahead into the future. But in the last few years, I agree with the statement that is being made in the article there, that it is looking to the past is also providing an opportunity for authors to share and contribute to the human condition in a different way. What do you think about how that's working in stories that you tell or stories you enjoy reading.
I think it's definitely a big piece of it. Sort of the way that I view it and the way that I've talked about it in the past is to say, historical fiction is never really just about the past. Like, I'm not just talking about women who are climbing a mountain. I'm talking about, women who are doing bold things when people are telling them not to, which is a thing that has happened forever. And people have told men no too, but that's not the story I'm telling. Somebody else tells that story. I tell this one. And the book that I wrote about women getting thrown into insane asylums, even if they weren't crazy because they were inconvenient. Something that dramatic may not happen to you or anyone you know, but there are ways that women are treated by men who think they're inconvenient that aren't that dissimilar. And I think it's worth looking back at the past and saying, oh yeah, we don't do that anymore, but how far have we really come? We don't institutionalize vast swaths of people the way that we used to in America, but boy, we have not figured out mental health treatment at all.
No, and the stigma of mental health is in the African American community among young men or men in particular is I think even Oprah has been doing something where it's more positively presented that there's nothing wrong with going and checking on things that might like depression, like just all of the things that can fall under that umbrella.
Get some help if you need some help, right? That's it.
Yeah, just admitting that help and getting that help, and there should not be a stigma associated with it. One of the other things that I discovered in the second book that I'm working on that I recently handed in to my editor, it takes place in 1928 and 1968. And as I was doing some of that research, I think I'm accurate in saying this, something I found about 1974, which gave me a whole different perspective on my late mother, in fact. Women did not have the right to have a credit card without their husband's signature on the credit card until 1974. And I was just, that floored me. I just had no clue. And I was like, my mother was married 5 times. And I was like, this is why she kept going back to the well, because that independence just wasn't a part of what she could do. Of course, I could have asked her, and maybe that wasn't really the only reason, but that was a very much a surprising bit of history. And that's why I do feel that these stories that uplift women and demonstrate the heroic and also the challenges that women face, be it in America, be it in Africa, be it in London, wherever they are in the world, are important stories that need to be told. And the opportunity for telling those stories is happening more and more, and that's pretty exciting. I'm very interested in that.
One of my research tidbits from the Arctic Fury, because there is a murder trial, and there are no women on the jury, of course, because it's 1854. But I, of course, then got super interested. Well, when were women allowed to serve on juries? And like in Wyoming, they were for 1 year, but then there was a different judge and they weren't anymore. And there were states where women weren't allowed to serve on juries until the 1960s.
Yeah, and
just, state by state.
On juries either during that time period, male or female. And so it definitely, one of the scenes, I won't give it away in your book, I think his name is Captain Malcolm. Oh yeah, I liked it.
I like it too.
I'll say no more. But lots of very I was talking to an author the other day. I was talking to Denise Williams, whose book is coming out on December 1st as well, How to Fail at Flirting. And, in the romance world, the hero or the love interest or whatever you want to call that main character is always crush worthy. But even if you don't have a love interest, what become in your story, what becomes of paramount importance is the relationships and the care between these women. And under such duress and the circumstances and trust and all of these issues that are in the mix, I find that those stories are just, they come so from the heart so much because of what the stakes are and all that sort of stuff. In your What are you thinking about in your next book that you want to tackle? Will you continue to explore those relationships that, even though history and adventure,
Right.
all the other things are there, but what are you thinking about for your next book?
Well, there are a few different things, and I want to ask about your next book and see how much we're allowed to find out about it at this stage. But for mine, I have sort of a fork in the road coming up. So I am looking at more historical fiction. I'm thinking I want to set something in New Orleans because I just love New Orleans and it's got such a rich and interesting history. But I also am under contract for epic fantasy.
Oh,
So
cool.
my next book won't be out till 2022, but it's my first series book.
Mhm.
So it's called The Five Queendoms, comes out in 2022, and it's about a matriarchal world, a female default world. So there are five different queendoms. Women are in charge of everything, and then what happens when girls stop being born. So it's very
Ooh.
different,
Oh, I
very
love
different.
that.
But definitely, I mean, what attracted me to fantasy at this point in my career is just we can imagine anything, like literally anything in a
Mhm.
fantasy or sci-fi world. So why do so many fantasy and sci-fi worlds still have patriarchy and sexual violence and slavery and all of these other things that don't have to be there because we can imagine, So that was part of the attraction of that. And also, as you know, with historical fiction, you're kind of bound by, not all facts from history. You get to pick and choose, but you're bound by the
Yeah.
broader things like no women on juries in the 1850s.
Mhm.
So it was sort of fun to just chuck all those rules out the window, like make my own rules and then follow those. Um, but it's a swords and sorcery, people doing magic, no dragons at
No,
the time. um,
fine with
but
me.
yeah, so that's super different. So it follows in some ways from the Arctic Fury because it's also adventure and women being bold and doing interesting things. It's just sort of cranked up even higher and less bound by
I definitely
our
enjoy
world.
fantasy. I actually have a fantasy, or urban fantasy, sitting off in a corner that maybe one day it's like, I think I have 110,000 words of it, but it's over there. We'll get back to it one day. Yeah, the the name of the book that is my next book is actually the first few scenes or chapters, if you will, are in the back of Wild Women in the Blues.
Oh, good.
It's called Blackbirds, and it's, as I mentioned, it's set in 1928 and 1968. It's sort of a long, 4-decade-long love story that has a little bit of a twist and things happening. But the inspiration for the story is a hotel in Los Angeles called the Hotel Somerville that opened in June of 1928 and eventually became the Dunbar Hotel, which was a huge jazz on Central Avenue jazz location. And one of my trips to LA a few years ago, I was able to go into the hotel and because it's still there, it's a senior housing right now after all of the decades and different things that have happened there. So I was very inspired by the idea of this hotel that was the first luxury hotel for Blacks only in Hollywood. And So I sort of play around with the idea. It's my Downton Abbey meets A Star is Born
Oh, I love that.
road trip in between. So yeah, that one, as I said, I sent it off to my editor, and it doesn't come out until 2022 either. So I expect to see it again and again
They circle around,
and again,
they go away, and then they come back.
and then it comes back again. So yeah, and but I'm also doing some research on some other stories, another 1925 story that I'm very excited about. But this one will be in a first time. I'll be in New York.
Yeah, different.
To live forever and a day, but I've lived in a lot of cities forever and a day. So
That's good. It gives you more to draw on, because then you're not, as historical fiction writers, we can't go to the places that we're writing about, in a literal sense. But even walking the streets, I found when I was working on Woman 99, I was writing about San Francisco. And when I went to San Francisco, I took a little walk along the route that I had drawn for my people, and realized you can't talk while walking up that hill. Like, that's not a thing. So you need the city. You need
important stuff to know too.
Many things have changed, but not the fact that that's like, that it's San Francisco. So
with one of the in Chicago, you have some of the tours that they offer in the city will take you along the different routes where the jazz clubs were in the 20s and things like that. So you can get a sense of that. And also, I spent a lot of time with archivists at the Harold Washington Library in Chicago, as well as with the Library of Congress. And for historical fiction writers, I totally suggest reaching out, no matter where you live, to the Library of Congress, because they have something called Ask a Librarian. And those women and men who are those people who look at your questions and then go on the hunt to track down the information that you are seeking. I love those people. I have had some amazing research shared through that process. And the other one, of course, is newspapers, especially with Wild Women in the Blues. I also listened to a lot of the blues songs from that time period, because that gave me a sense of cadence and conversational idioms that I could use. And I find that music is an inroad to almost anything I write. What are the people hearing? And because that sort of gives you a sensibility of the culture. So it was really going into Blackbirds in the 1968 story, going back and listening to songs I know my mother would have loved, and I probably heard around the house. But just some of the artists. I have a scene where it's sitting on the dock of the bay actually makes a big moment happen in the early part of the book. So anyway, music has always been important to me, and of course dancing and just the artistic side of the industry. On my Instagram, you will often see me sharing something about history of dance, especially Black dancers and the history of Black dance in this country and worldwide, because it's just so much to share and so much that I enjoy about it.
And I think music is one of those really powerful details that you can pull from a time. And it's hard to write about music, but it sounds like you're deep in it enough that sort of you have the vernacular, and if you're pulling at least, and some of them are songs that we would be familiar with in modern day, and some we weren't. I always remember there's a historical novel that I was reading, and I won't call it out because I don't remember what it was, so that's good. But somebody said, I was walking, the character's walking down the street and heard from a third floor window somebody playing a popular song on the cornet. I'm like, why would you do that? Like, even if the modern audience doesn't know what the song is, say the name of the song, because even the names of songs from certain periods in the past will tell you a lot.
Right, but there's another thing about using songs in books is that you really have to check public domain and what you can say, how much you can say about that song, because songwriters. When I was doing events, not to get too far off topic, if you have more than 2,000 people, you have to register your event and pay royalties. Even if you only use a piece of a song. So it's according to, if you go back far enough, it's public domain.
And you can just write the lyrics of the whole thing.
You can put everything in there. And so long as they don't have a foundation behind them, you're good to go. I'm looking over here and seeing if we have any questions, and I don't see any.
I don't see any yet, but people can definitely ask us anything. We are here to answer. And in the meantime, I will show one of my, you mentioned the Library of Congress for research, which is great. Girl in Disguise was about the Pinkerton Agency, and the Pinkerton Agency archives are at the Library of Congress. So I was able to go and visit there. A lot of my Arctic research, I really, really prefer to do all of my research and then write a draft and then go back and do more research. But I was in a rush writing this particular book for a number of reasons. And so I was researching at the same time that I was writing, which I do not recommend at all. But I was reading things like Sir John Franklin's Erebus and Terror Expedition. Those are the names of the ships, the Erebus and the Terror. And this is how many notes I had on this particular book, and just reading and reading and reading. And the thing that was so good about writing about the Arctic, the tough thing is, it's a completely unknown area to me and to most readers, and how do you even decide what to talk about? But there were a lot of people who were writing very detailed journals about their trip up there. So I was able to draw a lot from books and, like you said, newspapers, articles. The search for Franklin was well documented, so I could at least understand. There's a map in the book, understand how the bays all fit together, and looking at temperature data to say when a particular bay would be iced in and when it wouldn't, and all of those details. Very important. I do expect to get emails from people if I get anything wrong. That is what you get to look forward to in March. People emailing you about things that they think should be different.
Believe me, I have chatted with a number of historical fiction authors and have heard most definitely that be prepared for folks to at least ask questions about some of the historical references you have in your book. And in Wild Women in the Blues, I also have historical figures that make appearances. People like Louis Armstrong, his second wife, Lil Hardin Armstrong, and of course Alberta Hunter, who I met, and other people, including Oscar Micheaux. And that's just a few, because Chicago, part of town called the Stroll, where on State Street, and the Dreamland Cafe, which was 3200 block of State Street, there were just so many clubs during the 20s, and just so much action in the area, entertainment, people just living, good lives, hard lives, strong lives. And so there's a lot of meat to work with during and Chicago's just an interesting city. It's I lived there for a while, and I always like to tell a story or two about good old Chicago. So I'm looking and I see, we have a question, yay! And it's from Victoria Palmer. And what are some of your favorite historical fiction novels by other authors? I can start. We mentioned Remembrance by Rita Woods. I am also a huge fan of an author by the name of Beatrice Williams, and Chanel Cleeton, Kate Quinn, Stephanie Dre, Laura Camoni. I can go on and on. Historical fiction, other authors. Oh my gosh, there really are so many. And you go for a while.
I'll weigh in. I'll also have like a laundry list and thinking of more like as we talk. I think my favorite historical novel of all time, sort of reaching back, is Margaret Atwood's Alias Grace, which was very a big part of my inspiration for The Magician's Lie and the structure of that book. I will read anything by Ariel Lawhon. I will read anything by Fiona Davis. I will read anything by Marie Benedict, who I'm doing a joint event with in January. She and I are with the same publisher, and she wrote a book about the 11 days that Agatha Christie disappeared.
Yeah.
And I can't wait.
I'm very interested.
I can't say that's my favorite yet because I haven't started it, but I have it right here, and I'm super excited.
Librarian as well. That's by Marie Benedict. That's coming out, I believe, in 2021.
Yes, right.
That one. I have to look. Tracy Chevalier. She wrote the girl with the pearl earring. One of my, which is a beautiful book, definitely. But another one of her books called A Single Thread, I enjoyed tremendously. And I have to look through my list of folks.
I'm looking at my cheat sheet too here.
Right, because there's so many. I definitely Alyssa Cole.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh, and to me, historical fiction encompasses historical romance and everybody. So that, of course, includes Beverly Jenkins and such a list. Oh my gosh. Other authors. I'm trying to think. You mentioned a lot of the folks that I enjoy, but I just have so many books to read. Oh, I forgot about one of my faves. I am in love with the Outlander series. In fact, I have traveled. Well, I'm in love with the books, but I'm also in love with the TV series. And I was writing recaps for a number of years for the TV series, which I hope will come back for a 6th season so I can continue to do that. But I also traveled to Rome so I could meet the cast. Well, not really the whole cast, but Sam Hugan, who plays Jamie on...
If you can only meet one.
Yeah. I traveled all the way to Rome to do that. Malcolm and Me by Robin. What's Robin's last name? Is it just Robin? It's middle grade historical fiction set in 1973. That sounds interesting. Robin Farmer. No problem. Victoria. I'm talking to Victoria on notes here. There are so many books that are historical fiction, and there's so many more that are coming out. I'm very conscious of the genre since I almost feel, I mentioned that I had a lot of great connection that I felt happened in life, but this particular book, I sort of stumbled upon historical fiction. My agent was a judge of a contest, and this book was entered in the contest, but not the book. It's really first 25, 50 pages. And originally, there was a digital publisher had a call and said, here's a photo, write a story about this photo. Well, to me, the photo looked like a chorus girl from the 20s. And next thing, and I wrote an 18,000-word short story, and it got rejected, and they sent it back to me and said, we love the premise, why don't you write a whole book? And I was like, okay. And I forgot about that and went on and did something else. But eventually I came back. So that story had a lot of years of development and back and forth before it became a book that my agent could actually send to someone and send out on submission. And I was fortunate enough to have Kensington and my editor, Essie Soga, grab hold of it. I'm looking that we also got some, I got a tweet or two that I saw here. Okay, so any more questions for us? I'm wondering, we have a few minutes left, and I'm trying to think of, I can always talk about some other books.
Yeah, let me recommend a couple more that I thought of while we were talking
Okay,
too. Christina Baker Klein's The Exiles is a really cool recent book about women being transported to British convicts, basically being sent to Australia in the 1840s. And oh shoot, what was the other one? Oh, and anything Chris McMorris writes. Christina McMorris is
yes,
very, very talented. So
yes,
the Edge of Lost.
The Edge of Lost, right.
On a Monday is her newest one.
Mm-hmm.
So she's got some interesting things in the works. It's funny to see how many people, like, I think the one that you mentioned about The Librarian by Marie Benedict is co-written. We're seeing a lot of like interesting collaboration type projects. There are some people, and I'm not going to be able to remember all of them. Beatrice Williams, Karen White, and Lauren Willig, maybe the three W's. They write like joint novels together, and some people do short stories together. Like, there's so much collaboration. It's really interesting.
So much going on. Oh, I found a couple more. The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi, and I'm mispronouncing her last name, Joshi. And there's just too many. I feel like I'm going to put things in my newsletter and just have everybody and just keep talking about it, because it just keeps coming.
And I do see you guys did get one more, but I feel like you may have touched on this, but if not.
Ooh.
Oh, period, which you write about that you haven't looked at yet. That's an interesting thing, because I am looking at a period I haven't looked at yet, but that's about all I'll say about that one. Yeah, it's never say never is what I'm starting to feel, because I used to say I'm only going to do a certain time period, and then a story just comes to you and you can't let go. So I'm not gonna say I have a particular time period that I'm in love with. I'm in love with time.
My stories have all, like, I'm inspired by a lot of different things, and yet the 4 books so far have all fallen between 1850 and 1905, and all set in different parts of America. So I do clearly have a lane. But at the same time, like, I'd love to write about Marie Curie, who had a fascinating life. And then I just learned about one of the characters. I stole a couple adventures of a woman named Margaret Fuller, who was a really interesting and important early feminist who was a journalist. She was the first full-time book critic. She read every book in the Hartford Library. And then she perished in a shipwreck with her Italian lover and their illegitimate child. And I'm like, why do we know about Susan B. Anthony when we could be reading about this woman instead? Not a historical period, but a historical figure that I'm like, I ordered the full-length biography. I'm like, I got to read some more about Margaret Fuller. I got a lot going on.
Yeah, I have. Now that you think, there's another story that I stumbled upon with my research. There was a ferry boat disaster in Chicago in 1905, and it was one of the largest non-war death counts of more than 800 people. It's the Eastwood, and what I found is that there were 3 African Americans involved in that day, and I want to write their story and in connection of that disaster. But there were 2 men on board who were fixing toilets, and 1 woman who was on board. And the reason I found out about it was in the Chicago Defender had an article about the disaster and whether or not there were any people of the race on board. That's terminology used in the time period. But anyhow, yes, too many stories.
So many stories
So
out
many
there. We
stories.
cannot write them all.
That's
Yeah.
one of my favorite parts of historical fiction is just that sort of that rabbit hole that you then send us readers on. We're like, wait, I need to know more about this person
Right.
or this event, or
Yeah.
that's we did an event earlier last month, maybe with Jess Walter and his new book, The Cold Millions. He is a 19-year-old pregnant labor activist. I'm like, who is this person? I need to know.
I need to know now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I was just saying there was one more. I think it was just a nice comment. Excited to read both of your novels. So
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you both, Greer and Denny, for this wonderful hour, and thanks everybody for tuning in. We do have links here, so if anybody wants to buy either of your books, we're also taking pre-orders for Denny's book in March. So we're happy to help fulfill those. And Greer, we're gonna find some time for you to come and sign some books.
Yes, I will do.
Wow.
Yes, personalized and everything.
And I'll come back to sign books in March.
All right.
Let me out of the house.
I know. Hopefully by March. Yes. Yes,
let me just mention also pre-orders, because the book comes out on Tuesday, so you've only got a couple of days to pre-order. But if you pre-order from One More Page or elsewhere, please make it an independent bookstore, and please make it One More Page. But you can submit your proof of purchase basically to my publisher Sourcebooks, and you get a signed book plate, a lip balm, very important for travel to the cold north, and a light blue nail polish, very nice northern color. And then your name gets entered into a drawing for the grand prize, which is a warming from the inside and outside prize pack with like a blanket and some hot chocolate and lots of other fun things. So that's a little treat for pre-orders that my publisher.
Nice. I know I've seen that on your Twitter feed. We'll add it to the web.
Right.
Yeah, and it's on my website.
I also have a sampler up on at different retail outlets. The first few chapters of Wild Women in the Blues are free on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Nook, just several places. So if you want to get a little taste of the story, check it out.
All right. Well, thank you all for closing out our Small Business Saturday.
Thanks, everybody.
And hopefully we'll see everybody in person soon.
Yay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.